is difficult, at least. On the other hand, of course, Europe has a big interest in stability in the region for a number of reasons, some of which has been mentioned. And so I think, in a way, I'm not excluding that the political capital or interest could be generated, but I think we have been ourselves as Berko Foundation involved in a number of Track 2 talks and dialogues with Iran, because Iran is without doubt a very, very influential, important actor in the region. So engagement is necessary at a Track 2 level, but also realizing, and I have done for the EU 2 years back a mapping of initiatives of Track 2 dialogues, European mostly and Iranian dialogues, and many of these dialogues, I'm definitely saying it's useful, and I would say at the current moment, practical steps that should be protected, that space, because to keep channels of communication open is very important. But a good Track 2 dialogue, of course, needs to be linked to a political initiative. Just sitting and talking, while it's useful also to understand each other, is not enough. So a good Track 2 initiative needs to develop ideas that can be taken up. So it's either preparing or accompanying a political process. And this political process I would not see at the moment. I would see the chances for it rather limited. But that doesn't mean that not the developments in the region, and also I think what is very, very relevant will be the future of Iranian Gulf relationships. Because if that's continuing and builds a very strong block for de-escalation in the region, I think that will be very, very important as a building block. And that might be something where also the EU, European states might be interested to come in. Otherwise, we need a lot of confidence building measures. So that means we also need clear signals of things that can happen, new ideas. And again, here Track 2 surely can play a role to identify those topics and to test them and bring them back and forth. So all in all, I would caution. I would still think Track 2 now it needs to be protected to be able to develop and prepare, but don't, in terms of expectation management, I think we should be very realistic. It will be very difficult at the moment to start anything politically where Europe really pulls behind it its weight, which, yeah.
Thank you. We'll start there. Good morning, everybody. My name is Khalifa. I'm the Director General of the Institute for Political and International Studies, IPIS in Tehran. Louder. Well, lack of acknowledgement, I think, is the very root causes of the challenges and problems between Iran and the European countries. The fact that very responsible behavior and policies of Iran in different areas and regions getting not enough acknowledgement from the European countries. And by the way, Iran has been protecting Europe with regard to many massive probable challenges and acting as safeguarding European countries against three important challenges in the region, which is the radicalism of the Salafism, the influx of the refugees to the European borders, and the drug trafficking problem, as you know. And Iran has been adopting very responsible policies in decades, which has not get enough acknowledgement from the European countries. And this lack of acknowledgement is still going on in the European side. And the fact that Europe is making a very strategic mistake in trying to weaken Iran and this region, and generally speaking, based on the fact that Iran has been safeguarding Europe against all those challenges, and if uncertainties, just look to Syria and many uncertainties in Syria that everyone is expecting, the fact that the doors of the hell will be open to European countries if Iran is losing these positions in many areas and subjects. The fact that everything is emotionalized in the side of the European country with regard to Iran, just take a look, as Dr. Imam just well mentioned, many emotional policies and behaviors from the European side vis-à-vis Iran very recently. And in that regard, Europe will be by the way, will be the loser. It will be a lose-lose game. It is not a win-lose game in the favor of European countries. So, and we see that the European countries are facing with the challenge of strategic irrelevancy everywhere. And in this region, the European countries are strategically irrelevant. Their inaction, their lack of strategic insight, as we see with regard to Iran and their behavior vis-a-vis Iran. And with having this emotionalized behavior toward Iran, they are increasing and strengthening this strategic irrelevancy in this region, by the way. The fact that the trend in this region with the new mindset of the leaders has been based on a new understanding about the definition of security, the sense of security, and how countries can have an inclusive approach based on a win-win game. And European countries are doing and repeating the same mistake that the United States has been, adopting for many years and failed, to try to divide and rule in this region. And if European countries are going to have some important role in the Persian Gulf region, they need to follow the same route of the inclusivity in the region, not to try the wrong policies of the United States, which was a big failure. Well, I think, and with regard to Trump, I guess the European countries would not be so much in favor of possibility of Iran interaction with Trump, second administration, and the possible easy deal between Trump and Iran, as it is the case with regard to the Russia and the Ukrainian crisis. Meanwhile, I think, based on all, this understanding about the importance of having interaction and to try to be able to talk at least. First of all, to acknowledge that we have two different value systems, and to acknowledge that this difference does not mean that we cannot negotiate, we cannot talk. We can, first of all, we can agree that we have different value systems, to agree that we can disagree on some areas and some subjects. And by the way, even with regard to the Ukrainian crisis, which has been the very important psyche of the European countries, shaping their policies vis-a-vis Iran, the fact that Iran has also been adopting many responsible policies. You know that Iran never recognized the annexation of Crimea to Ukraine, to Russia, the annexation of Donbass to Russia, and Iran also made the same position with regard to the resolution as many Arab countries made, as India made. So I think there are many misunderstandings. We need to try to find new mechanisms of communication, to try to compartmentalize many issues, and to try to avoid conditioning. The conditioning is also wrong policy by the European countries, conditioning and one issue to another issue. We need to avoid this conditioning, to try to compartmentalize the problems and to go case by case and find many diversified channels of communication. And IPIS, as the leading institute and research and think tank in Iran, is ready to play important role, as we are doing with some European countries. Thank you.
Thank you. And might I ask the coming speakers to limit their interaction so we can get in as much people as possible. We go to Mark, then Ellie, then Ali, then the lady on my right.
So, very short comment and then a question. I mean, the comment is, ETFR, we spent almost the entire time that ETFRs existed for ways of de-escalating the region, building different kinds of relationships, inclusive processes. But I have to say that the whole European perception of Iran has changed in such a fundamental way that hasn't really been captured by this discussion. I just think it's important for colleagues from Iran to realize that you've changed category. You used to be a country that was of interest to people in the Middle East, and the sort of strategic calculus that you talked about was of relevance, but you were quite a low salience country. The biggest fear that Europeans had was of America or Israel bombing your nuclear facilities, and that's why it was very important for Europeans to be engaged in diplomacy. But you're now seen as a co-belligerent in a war on the European continent, and a third of European countries feel existentially threatened by that war, and confidence-building measures are not going to change that. So it's just a very different situation. So the idea of removing sanctions or doing things like that is pure fantasy while the war in Ukraine is going on, and Iran is playing the role that it's playing. I still think that dialogue and discussions are really important. I'm very depressed at the state of relations between Iran and Europeans, but I do think that we're in a fundamentally different situation, because Ukraine matters a lot more to European countries than Iran ever will do. But one of the things that's really depressed me is also that we have much less contact and much less idea about how things are going on. We've been going through these profound changes. And I'd love to hear from colleagues in Iran in particular how you are interpreting what's going on, and particularly given that a lot of the architecture of how we thought about the region, of deterrence, of security, and the different relationships are changing. I think it's quite important for Europeans to understand how these things are being digested and framed within Iran. And those are things that are very much not part of our debate and discussions. It would be fascinating to get a bit more of a sense from you about how you're thinking about these things.
Thank you, Mark. We go to Ellie.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for putting this meeting together. Just to sort of follow up from Mark's point, I think for our colleagues in Tehran, it's very important to understand that if they're going to come to a negotiating table with the E3 and EU, there's going to be two top priorities for Europeans, and that's going to be, first of all, Iran's military cooperation with Russia going forward, in particular the transfer of advanced technology and more lethal weapons, such as more advanced missile systems. That's going to be really key. And if there is movement in the coming months on that front from Tehran and Moscow, there is a very high likelihood that the E3 will use snapback. And sort of that is a signal that they are sending very strongly. And it may be that the Trump administration comes in and in the first week asks the E3 to pull snapback. So this is something that in your discussions with the E3, you should be really trying to find some trade-offs and understanding on how the Russia-Iran cooperation may be traded off for withholding snapback. And the second issue that is really important to the capitals is their perceived state threats, the direct threats that they perceive coming from Tehran in their soil, that has really, in their view, had a massive uptick in the last 2 years, and there needs to be a solution found to that. I would say also that, you know, the three categories that our colleagues from Tehran put, Salafism, refugees, drug trafficking, these do not feature in the European thinking on Iran at all. This is sort of 1990s discussion, which from the European perspective, I'm afraid, is not relevant now going forward. And this is as someone who's been working, by the way, on Iran-EU relations for 10 years, trying to push for dialogue. So I'm just trying to add some realism to the discussion here. I would also say that I think Iran has understood this, but I would advise that if there is a push for a deal with the US, that unfortunately the E3 are not going to be the sort of messengers that are going to be heard in Washington. Using your partners in the GCC states is going to be a much better avenue for influencing the Trump administration, and frankly I would advise doing that as soon as possible, working through figures like MBS and MBZ to try and influence and shape Trump's policy directly, because, you know, there is all of the personnel, frankly, that he has appointed are Iran hawks and very, very pro-Israel. So the quicker there is movement on a dialogue, I think the more likely it is that there can be an opening. And I'll just finish by saying that one thing that I'm really thinking of, and I would welcome our friends from Tehran to give me an answer, is that in 2015, when a lot of us were working on the nuclear deal, the theory was that Iran could provide nuclear guarantees to the West because actually its security architecture was provided by the axis of resistance, that it was the deterrence equilibrium with Israel was going to hold, despite the fact that it was essentially diluting its nuclear capabilities. And the big question I have now is, how do the folks in Tehran that are pro a nuclear deal now sell this domestically to the hard security establishment now that the deterrence structure has fundamentally changed? Thank you.
Thank you. We go to Ali, then Maria Louise.
Thank you very much, Dr. Majid, for organizing this. What a depressing way to start the morning. And I want to start by saying obviously Crisis Group couldn't agree more with what ECFR just said, but I just add a little bit more to it. It's depressing because for 4 centuries, the Iranians have found their comfort zone in negative balancing between great powers. And the current administration, the Pezeshkian administration, came to office on the promise of doing just that because they realized that they got too close to Russia and China, and they wanted to fix that imbalance. For 4 decades, Europe has basically played the role of mediator between Iran and the United States. And I hope that it still wants to get back to it, but you know, what we hear in this room, which is reflection of reality, is Europeans saying Iran has become too toxic, Iranians saying Europe has become too irrelevant. I wonder how we can get over that. One thing that I think is clear from conversations with European officials that I understand is that Europe is now where the United States has been since 2016, which is that it's no longer interested in transactional deals with Iran. It wants transformational change. And because it's difficult to create consensus around transactional understandings within the 27 member states, different interests, for some, Ukraine and the Russia lens is more important than anything else. And also because of a phenomenon that did not really exist in Europe but has been present in the United States almost in the from the beginning in the post-revolutionary era, which is domestic political pressure from diaspora. And I don't think we can overlook that. I hope with everything that has happened in the past few months that there is a degree of rethink in Tehran about the general direction of travel. But over the years, I've learned not to conflate hope with analysis. That's why I want to suggest that we rethink, not hope that Iranians would rethink, but rethink the approach. And the approach can no longer be Iran and Europe having a dialogue to try to fix issues on their own. Either, as Eli said, it will be an Iran-US channel that would bring about that kind of transformational change, or that the Europeans will try to attach themselves to the GCC, who are now much better placed to have to play the bridge between Iran and the West, and use their experience in dialogue and in understandings with Iran to basically triangulate this relationship. Otherwise, I think this would be an inflection point for relations going from bad to worse.
Thank you, Ali. And I think everybody from the GCC here is grinning at the prospect of us being the proverbial white horse in this situation. So we go to Maria-Louisa.
Thank you for using my full name, Majid. And thank you for inviting me here. And I want to really echo a bit of what also Ali has said. I think that there is an opportunity for Iran to show that diplomacy, that Iran is able to do diplomacy, and that opportunity comes very much also in relation to the neighborhood, the Gulf countries. With some colleagues, we had been just coming from Manama Dialogue yesterday, and it was remarkable to see how the tone of Gulf states has changed vis-a-vis of Iran. And when on the podium there was actually Western EU officials, they were much more hawkish vis-a-vis of Iran than Gulf officials. So this was like new to me, at least compared to the past edition, while the Gulf officials were very forthcoming about an idea on how Iran and the Gulf states can sit at the table and do diplomacy on different files. However, here there is also work to be done in order to really put things on the table from also the Iranian side. Because I think that also from the Gulf country point of view, there needs to be some concrete action taken, whether it's on maritime issue, whether it's on, obviously, the stress is very much on non-state armed group activities. So if you take that as a starting point and you bring it also to a European counterparts, both the Gulf and the EU, Gulf and Iran,
From perhaps deterring this. So to in our mind, accountability and deterrence go hand in hand. Along with these nation states that we've been working with in this coalition, we've had a chance to meet at the UN General Assembly in last September. We have meetings, regular meetings in Washington, D.C., or the capitals of the nations that are participating, and we're really trying to find a way that allow us to raise the cost against these countries. Additionally, we've been working with the independent panel on arbitrary detention. It's an esteemed group of jurists, 7 in all, that are taking a look at the existing legal mechanisms that are out there that might be used against the taking of our citizens. It's making progress. It owes a report back to the body I want to say February of 2025, and we'll take the recommendations very seriously and see if there are ways that we all can progress to take a look at those existing legal mechanisms. But additionally, we're also working with the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, a body that has rendered judgments, for example, against Russia in the case of Evan Gershkovich, some of our American citizens who were taken in Venezuela, for example. And that's a very important body. It's very important, we think, to have international bodies declare that this is a wrongful thing to do, and it provides, I'd say, the necessary wherewithal to allow us to start taking action. Following up what the minister said, you can say something, but you actually have to start taking concrete actions in order to make this issue go away. I would say that the hard part is trying to change the calculus, we believe, of the nations that do this. If there's a country that systemically takes our citizens arbitrarily, how do you get them to stop doing that? And what we found is that the constant use of sanctions may not be enough. It's going to take that coalition to come together to get it done, and it's probably going to take a few years. As Secretary Blinken said when he asked us to look at this problem, it might take 10 to 12 years to get it done, but we have to start someplace, and building a coalition is going to be the best way to do it. I would say aside from the coalition, I can tell you that within the United States, there are citizens now that are taking nation states to court. We've had Americans who are former detainees held in Iran that now have judgments against the country of Iran to make right what happened to them when they lost years of their lives. And the United States Congress is now looking at passing legislation that will allow them to declare states as sponsors of arbitrary detention. But really, when you ask the question, where are we right now? The train has left the station. It may only be going 30 kilometers an hour, but there is movement. We are starting to make progress, but sadly, we're still probably years away from having a strong, robust coalition that can raise the price so that this horrible practice eventually goes away.
Well, thank you very much. You have been engaged under several administrations on this topic, very important, and thanks for your leadership and looking after that big challenge that we are facing. Comfort, I would love to pick your brain. I mean, the International Crisis Group is looking every year at the most important crisis. So I was wondering what we are thinking, what you're following the news that one of the worst humanitarian crisis where in Syria is taking this abrupt change. But I also want to ask you on another crisis that was mentioned by the President of the General Assembly, and that is Sudan. Sudan, a country where we have today the worst humanitarian crisis, more than 10 million refugees, and there you have a lot of non-state actors. And what do you think, what has to be done, can be done to also prevent non-state actors from committing crimes against humanity, and what can we do against those responsible for this horrible humanitarian catastrophes as we see them in Sudan?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be a partner of Qatar in running the Doha Forum, and thank you very much for this important session as well, because in the era of impunity, it's important that we are able to confront these issues straight on. I mean, the interesting thing about Sudan, Christoph, is that about 10 years ago or so, began the mechanism, the long arm of justice was put on Sudan in the form of the ICC, and the Security Council was the custodian of trying to manage and deal with the accountability issues in Sudan, and that was very much targeted and aimed at the President, Bashir, at the time. And the African Union, in fact, a number of heads of state never imagined that the long arm of justice would target a head of state. But fast forward, because you're talking about contemporary affairs now in Sudan, and particularly with the Rapid Support Force and General Hemeti as well. I mean, there have been certain steps that have been taken, sanctions, travel bans, various instruments have been leveled on both sides of the crisis, and particularly him. But this is not having what you refer to as the deterrent effect. This is not preventing or rolling back atrocities, which therefore raises a number of conundrums about what is the effectiveness and usefulness of these instruments if they're not able to alter facts on the ground. If the various fighting forces, whether it's the Sudanese armed forces or the paramilitaries or the other militia groups, are not able to change their tactics, they're not able to cease fire, they're not able to pause and come to the table, then it throws into question the viability of these various instruments and institutions. And is it a surprise? Because a number of these actors, whether non-state or state actors, are looking at across the world, looking at other arenas. I mean, we've talked about Gaza, we can talk about Ukraine. They're looking at a number of serious examples and seeing, quite frankly, that they can get away with it, because they see the inconsistency in which these accountability measures are being applied in a number of arenas. They see that they can use military force willingly. They see that they can apply a degree of atrocious crimes, atrocities, and still manage to stay in power. They see that there are a number of other states that are heavily reliant on them for their various national interests, and continue to help them to fuel their war, because they see that these paramilitary forces or other armed forces are useful commodities, useful mercenaries, useful actors in other countries. So is it a surprise that you have these two forces that have a long lifeline in Sudan? 20 years ago, Sudan, what was happening in Darfur was labeled a genocide. And here we are 20 years later with a new, well, not new cast of characters, the same cast of characters, and looking and recognizing that despite these various mechanisms, they have been able to continue to fuel their war. So we have to ask ourselves, about the legitimacy, the viability, and the effectiveness of these instruments in the midst of sort of other geopolitical headwinds. Now, I'm not suggesting, however, that all is lost, because I think the key for civilians also is to making sure that we're able to keep the door to justice opened, if not for today, but for tomorrow. So it's important what's already been put in place in Sudan, but quite frankly, I think the message that Sudanese are seeing, other countries are seeing, is that we can get away with it because the key countries that can stop us in our pause are also applying justice willy-nilly whenever it suits them, and ignoring it when it suits them as well.
Well, thank you for that again. It is so important that people who commit these horrible crimes don't have the feeling that they can get away with it. And this is again for me to repeat what I said before. The mechanism was set up, the IIIM for Syria. It is so important, and Assad also with his the horrible crimes committed also has to face justice. Mr. President, you are looking back at a long period as president. Namibia has been very strong also in the UN, as supported UN. You and my country, Germany, were drafting the declaration that was adopted at the UN on the summit for the future, and I think that was a very good cooperation. Comfort Ero just mentioned Sudan, and the horrible crisis there. When you look back, and as an African leader, when Africa always claims African solutions to African problems, how frustrated are you when you see in Sudan, when you see in Somalia, when you see in the Sahel all these horrible suffering of people, that African solutions are not there yet? What is your message to your successor, to the next generation of African politicians? How can you prevent these atrocities from continuing to happen?
Once again, thank you very much. Namibia prides itself as a child of the international community, midwifed by the United Nations. And if we decide one day to create another institution and leave the UN, I think Namibia will still be the last to leave the UN. That we believe in that. We believe in its ability, the way it was structured, to help save humanity. Now, we are facing really problems. Namibia gained her independence in 1990. And we were the last, among the last, the very last of the colonies. And we were hopeful that now, for the first time, we are going to live in the world of peace, world of stability. No quarrels, no fighting, no border issues. Our aim should be to develop our society, train our people, create hospitals, build our roads, and under the African Union, create a continental unity that can solve all these problems. As it was said by others, here we are. Problems continue. Problems are even getting worse. My appeal is each country and each leadership and each people, for that matter, must take a stand against violation of human rights, against creating excuses why we have to do criminal activities, why we have to hang to power by foul means, by violent means. And therefore, there is no one solution. We we in Africa too lack the caliber of Julius Nyerere's of their time, the Kenneth Kaundas of their time, the Agustino Netos of their time, the Sam Nuyomas of their time. We lack them. And it's not because there are no people. It's of dedication to duty, dedication to unity of that of our own countries and the unity of our neighborhood within SADC, the neighborhood of the African continent and in the world. So we will continue to believe, we will continue to support, we will continue to engage. That's why we are grateful to be here in Qatar. It is not because of the size, it's not because of the large population, but the wisdom and the will to contribute to the welfare of humanity as a whole. If we all continue to do that, then we can continue to solve problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. State Minister, in your previous remark, you highlighted, on the one hand, the need for the Security Council, for the international community to take care of the challenge of accountability. At the same time, you also pointed to the lack of ability for the P5 to get together. Now, the President of the media just said that each and individual state also carries responsibility. Let me ask you, when we come to impunity, when we come to the need for accountability for crimes against humanity, war crimes, etc., if on the international level there is no possibility, how about national levels? How about non-state actors that have committed crimes being prosecuted by national courts? Is this something that you believe is important? We have the principle of universality. In Germany, we actually tried some of those who committed horrible crimes in Syria. They were prosecuted in a German court. Is this something you believe should be universal? Is this something that you are considering for your country?
100%, in a short answer. Definitely, I believe that there is a big responsibility for states in this important topic. Christoph, the international humanitarian law was designed not to protect the legal provisions, but to protect the humanity. And if countries and states are not taking up that responsibility and taking all measures needed to protect and preserve those international principles, then unfortunately we will remain in a situation where, as you said, the wrongdoer will run away and no accountability system will apply. And therefore I think it's extremely important, and I will mention just a few points. As I mentioned to you, I'm a former lawyer, I'm a mediator, so my mind functions always as a problem solver, and trying to find solutions for every difficult crisis. And we've been passing by a very difficult crisis in the states of Qatar's 25 years of experience in the field of mediation, dealing with the most complex and difficult cases globally. Three things to take into consideration. The first one is a point that my dear friends, Roger, who I enjoy working with and partnering with in several cases in my work in the ministry, has mentioned a very critical point on those situations. My dear friends, Roger has mentioned the sanction. Is the sanctions always effective to be the only tool, or should we consider other alternative tools that may also have an impact? One of the alternative tools, which is the opposite of sanctions, is incentives. A solid program that will provide incentives for states and individuals that will help and assist the implementations of the ICJ rulings, the ICTS, the International Criminal Tribunal's rulings, and other important principles at the higher level. Therefore, we need to think of the alternatives as well and explore other options that may add a huge value to the contribution of this objective. A second point to mention, and you referred it to clearly, Christoph, is the issue of the regional role. But I will go even beyond that to the regional organizations. All of those regional organizations have a bigger duty as well to work towards helping and assisting the implementations of the European Union, the organizations, they need to take up that responsibility and what we call the international gap to fulfill that main objective. And last but not least, the spark of the war, because we're talking about international humanitarian law. The spark of that war started in a conflict. So for us to go back mechanism that will allow us to from getting into military clashes and a war is something that is extremely important. That's a mandate that Qatar has put in itself for more than 25 years. We want to work towards the peacemaking process regionally and internationally. Further again, and these are not new ideas. This has been discussed several times in different platforms, but I think it's crucial for us not to miss the alternatives that will help us to reach that level. Lastly, on the points of regional, absolutely I agree with you. Regional dimension when it comes to countries taking up that responsibilities, we applaud the initiatives that Germany's been doing by allowing and accessing their judicial system. Relate to international encourage the judicial process to be strengthened at the Thank you.
Thank you. Roger, you are one of the few officials that has been appointed by President Trump, and you kept your office during President Biden, and so you are above the parties there a bit. And can I ask you on the US and the stand the United States has reacted pretty severely in the past against the International Criminal Court, and the former officials of the court became persona non grata in the US, and as I said, there is a critical stand. How do you see this? As somebody coming from a country that has a very dark past, we were told after the Second World War, from now onwards, you Germans, you go by the rule of law. And when you see now our godfather, the US, being so critical on international law and on accountability on these courts that have been praised here, what are your thoughts about it, and what are your predictions about the United States also adhering to international mechanisms of justice and accountability?
I don't know if does this work either? This is usually you say thank you for that question. This one, I'm not sure I'm going to thank you for that. It's what I would say, and I'll be quick because I know the clock's running short and I want to make sure you get another question. What I would say, probably the only non-lawyer up here, is that I know my country does believe in accountability. I've seen that in action in 24 years of service in the military, my time at the U.S. Department of State. There are disagreements that we often have at very high levels as to what mechanism might be best to enforce justice when it comes to our own national interests. But I think overall you're going to find that if it comes to a matter of whether something's just or not, we're going to be at the table. We're going to have these discussions. I don't think the doors ever close. And so whether it's the ICC or another legal mechanism, if we're not to sign on to it, you can at least sure we're going to show up at the table and give you our opinion and see if we can work towards something that makes sense. So really that may not be a satisfying answer, and I would love to be a little more, I'd love to mention. What I can say is that we're going to be good partners in justice and accountability, but we at times do have. Did I skate that question well enough?
Well, I I was, when I asked the questions, I wondered if I were American, how I would respond to it. So it was a tough question. Now, I don't want to give a final word because time is running out. I want you, Comfort, to say final words with 3 sentences because we have the President of Senegal here and I don't want to take time from him. Comfort, the final words, and I would like to thank everybody else on the podium. Comfort, you have the final say.
No, thank you. I'll complete Roger's sentence as well. In the end, I think the message is that it's also down to the policy preferences of countries and states. And in this instance, we've seen in the last 18 months where there's been clarity, even at the domestic level of your legal instruments, the policy preference has overridden those legal frameworks that you do have that you could use within the parameters of the United States, regardless of the international treaties as well. Look, Christoph, I do want to underline one issue, that although, yes, there's a sense in which we are living in an era of impunity, there was one thing that you said, and I think our friends also said it, is that the importance also at the end of the day is to keep that door and a sense that there will be justice, if not today, but that it will be there later. And that is the lesson that I take away from Colombia, from Sierra Leone, from Liberia, even in Sudan, and in what is, and ultimately, hopefully, but the script has been written currently for Gaza. But we shouldn't overlook the decision of a number of states in relation to the ICJ ruling in relation to occupied Palestinian territories as well. I think that's important. I think we shouldn't overlook the important decision that was been taken by the ICC. There was a moment in time when we felt that this instrument had run its course. And we shouldn't also forget, Mr. President, you were alluding to it yourself, the African Union itself had a more forward-leaning, progressive sensing of international justice through its own Article H of the Constitutive Act as well. In response to what it labeled Western judicial imperialism, it came up with its own response to international criminal law as well. So I think we should cling on to those despite the atrocities and the violations that we're seeing every day, and to make sure that we do keep that door open and sense that there will be a day where we can deal with justice as well. So on that.
Thank you very much indeed to the conference for moderating this discussion and for touching on so many important at our every in the world said so often on this panel. For peace anywhere in the world if we do not have this crucial ingredient of justice and accountability. And how do we achieve it? Do we need more laws, more rules, more legal institutions? Find ways to shake off the political, the key institutions that are trying kind of justice for the victims of wars and conflicts, mostly civilians, all too often. Now, as we set the stage for our next session, perhaps a few more words about what we've been hearing this morning and what we have indeed been hearing throughout the first day of the Doha Forum yesterday. The recurring theme, as we've just said, of trying to find new innovative ways, trying to get away from the tired and tested approaches of the past. We just heard one of our panelists talk about sanctions being all too often applied. Should governments take on their responsibilities in different ways to make sure that sanctions, if they are applied, can actually be constructive and not simply end up targeting the most vulnerable people and leaving those who need to be held to account off the hook? Do we need to look at new tools in our toolbox? Should governments be looking at better ways to deal more constructively in their approach to mediation in order to prevent some of the world's conflicts from happening in the first place? Now, to our next session. It is a newsmaker interview with one of the world's newest and youngest democratically elected leaders in Africa. His vision, centered on just, equitable, and transparent governance, has garnered widespread support in his own country, particularly from the youth. Since his country's independence in 1960, in fact, no other opposition candidate had ever won an election in the first round, a decisive win with about 54% of the vote. He is a former tax officer. He was imprisoned following his criticism of the judicial system and its glaring inequalities. He was released just days before the elections last March. And today, he is serving his first term in office as President of Senegal. It is my distinct pleasure to invite to the stage His Excellency Bassirou Diomaye Faye to join me here for an interview. Bonjour. D'abord, Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi tout d'abord de vous souhaiter la bienvenue ici au Doha. Des gens au Sénégal, mais aussi par tout le monde. Tout le monde ici pourra le by asking you about the
en vous demandant
support from your country's youth. What did this victory represent for you, and what did it represent for Senegal and the wider African continent?
Merci beaucoup. Permettez-moi déjà de remercier les autorités qatariennes, en particulier Amir les autorités qatariennes pour les marques d'attention qui m'ont été réservées à ma délégation. Même au Sénégal, et en réalité, le choix du
there was this option for
%, a été respecté. Ce qu'il faut transparaît à travers ses dirigeants.
We would like
le peuple sénégalais qui a voté dans le calme et la sérénité.
the Senegali people
de comprendre
Speak English. And we gave an example to all the youth in the world and in Africa that we can reach power and achieve.
Quand on parle de jeunesse, vous n'avez que 44 ans, donc vous avez aussi un peuple très jeune au Sénégal, comme
are fighting against have an engagement the system. We are changing our vision of changing our economic system and our society. The idea is that we are targeting economic sectors, agriculture, the digital professions, and the professional technical training, and we have to products the future of our economy and